All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started here in a minute. If again, for some reason you cannot hear me, because I don't know a good way to test this, please email me or send me a text message if for some reason you can't hear. I tried to figure out how to get this group chat to work on the side, because I think that would be nice, but I can't seem to figure it out. So alas, we will proceed without the group chat. So I wanted to get started by reviewing some of the stuff that we did last time. So last time we talked about period 1 and 2. And I think, again, like I say in class, it's helpful before you start any new chapter in your book to review stuff from before. It's a good way for your memory to kind of build those long-term memory. So for period 1, for the key concepts, remember period 1, we said we don't really know when the start date is, maybe 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, but it goes until 600 BCE. And for period 1, we had 3 key concepts. So we had 1.1, which was big geography and peopling of the earth. And that was just all about people, the first people being in Africa, people migrating out of Africa, and how people adapted to the new environments that they were in, mainly hunting and gathering, living in small groups, etc. And then 1.2, the Neolithic Revolution happens. That's the invention of agriculture and farming. This is also where we see more patriarchy, more social structure, social classes, less diverse diet than before. And all of these early civilizations, these early societies, they traded, they lived near water. And we talked about those early ones like Egypt and Sumer in Mesopotamia and China and the Indus River Valley. And then 1.3 was all about like how did these early civilizations or these societies develop and interact with each other. So the ones who were better situated, who had better natural resources, usually did better. They conquered more areas. We also talked about how sometimes the weather made a big difference, like the ones who had more predictable flooding like Egypt were able to grow a more, I guess, advanced society in a way because they weren't faced with constant unknown flooding, etc. And we saw the development of early religions, mainly all polytheistic, but you do see the start of Judaism in this time period and Zoroastrianism in this time period. So that was period 1, and then, oh, there we go. Period 2. We talked was from 600 to 600 BC to 600 CE. And there are 3 key concepts for period 2. 2.1 was the development and codification of religious and cultural traditions. So this just means the beginning of new religions. Codification is kind of like putting them together. I'm going to think of like codifying rules or laws, etc. It's kind of like writing them down, putting it together. So you have the development of a lot of new religions in period 2. You've got Buddhism, Confucianism, Hinduism, Christianity, Taoism, lots of them. And a lot of those were built on once before. So like Christianity was built a lot on Judaism from before that. Hinduism was built on the Vedic religions. And then we also still see a lot of like ancestor veneration from period 1 continuing. And well, that's what I'm coming up with right now. Oh, and animism also continuing. In 2.2, you have development of states and empires. So these are our first big empires. So we've got Greece, Persia, Rome. In China, you've got Han and Gupta. Sorry, that was India. India's Han, India is Gupta. In China, you have the Han Dynasty. What other ones did we talk about last time? In Africa, this is the start of the Bantu, but we didn't talk about that last time. We'll talk about that today more. And then the Americas, you've got the Mayans, and then from period 1, the Moki, etc. So you have all these big states and empires, and we talked about why they all grew and why they all fell. So a lot of them are growing because they're starting governments, they're starting court systems, they're building monumental architecture, social structures, religion, etc. And then they're all falling because of disease coming in. Some of them got too big that they couldn't manage their whole empire. You also have some religious issues as well, which cause some of them to fall. Ruining the environment causes a lot of them to fall. And then your last one, 2.3, is about transregional networks of communication and exchange, which just means our trade networks. So period 2, you see all the trade networks develop, like the Silk Road, the Trans-Saharan trade, the Indian Ocean trade, and the Mediterranean Sea trade. And they all kind of peak in period 2, and then they fall at the end when all the empires fall. And then in period 3, you'll see them all come back. Okay. All right, so I told you last time that I would go over that practice short answer because we ran out of time last time. So all of the multiple choice and the short answers that I'm showing you on these videos are from a release test that College Board has online. Any of you can access it on College Board's website. But I'm pulling all of the questions on there so you can see ones that are, exactly ones that College Board has created. So for the short answer, they didn't have any on there for period 1, but they did have one for period 2. And so I'm just going to kind of talk through these. I'm not sure if I can, I can't type in here. So I could type down some, I can make this smaller and type in some information or details or some potential answers if that would be helpful. I think I've just got to zoom out here a little bit and make this a lot smaller. Let's try 14. Okay, there we go. All right, so that first one there is identify one way in which Judaism influenced the development of Christianity in the period 600 to 600. So if I were on the AP test, I would first think, okay, this is period 2, and it's asking me just one way that Judaism influenced the development of Christianity. So again, using ACE, I'm always going to start off by restating the question in my answer. So one way that Judaism influenced the development of Christianity was. So 2 things are popping into my mind that I could use here. I think I could talk about, I know that the book is similar, right? Like in the Bible, the first half of it is the Old Testament, which is the Jewish holy book. So I think I might be able to talk about how, the holy book influenced the development of the Christian holy book. And the other thing I'm thinking about is I could talk about Jesus and how, Jesus was a Jew and is the Christians consider him to be the Son of God. And so since Jesus was a Jew, obviously his beliefs are going to influence Christianity. So I think I'm going to go for Jesus. So one way that Judaism influenced the development of Christianity was that the main, I don't know if disciple is the right word here, but I'm going to use it as I don't know how to spell disciple. Disciple in Christianity was a Jewish person. Okay, so that's just kind of my basic answer. So now I'm going to explain who that person was. There's how I spell this. Explain who this person was and then how that influenced it. So I'll go for my next sentence here. The main disciple for Christianity is Jesus, who was a practicing Jew. Therefore, okay, so I've got my A, I explained, C, cited my evidence. The main disciple is Jesus. Therefore, Judaism influenced Christianity through their disciple. So again, this isn't anything that's super detailed. I'm sure you could go into much, much, much more detailed information on how Christianity is similar to Judaism. But this is fine for kind of a basic answer for that. And then B asks you explain one difference between the spread of Christian communities and the spread of Jewish communities, again, in period 2. So the first thing that I think of for this one is that Jewish communities, you have the Jewish diaspora, so they were forced to move and they spread that way, whereas Christian communities are sending out missionaries to try to spread their religion. So one's kind of a more forced spread than the other. So again, I'm going to restate this to answer it. So one difference between the spread of Christian communities and the spread of Jewish communities was that Jewish communities spread because of a forced migration, whereas Christianity voluntarily sent out missionaries. All right, and then for my example, I remember, because this multiple choice question came up last time on the videos, that the Assyrian Empire were the first ones to kick the Jews out. So I think I can write here, the Jewish diaspora began when the Assyrian Empire forced Jews to flee, thus spreading their religion. Well, this is a really run-on sentence. Well, Christianity sent out missionaries like, I think Paul was one, like Paul, who spread their religion. Okay, and then I'll do my E for explain. Therefore, they spread differently because one was forced and the other was not. All right, and then, I didn't mean to go another screen. All right, and then the last one here, we've got explain one similarity between the spread of Christian communities and the spread of Jewish communities. So we talked about a difference, and we need to talk about a similarity. Let's see. I know that Christianity was popular among the poor. I wonder if Judaism was as well. That's one thing that's coming up. I would assume that it probably was. Other similarities, they're both monotheistic, but that doesn't really help me with the spread. Judaism, I can't think of like an empire that adopts the religion, like Christianity will eventually get adopted by Rome. I think my best bet is to probably go for they spread because they were popular amongst the poor. Because when I think about like, yeah, I mean, the Old Testament is going to be poor people would also be drawn to that as well. So I'm going to go for that. One similarity between the spread of Christian communities and Jewish communities is that both spread to the lower class. Okay, so now I need to give an example of this. For example, both religions appealed to poorer people because they both offer salvation in the afterlife. Oh, which is true. See, now this is kind of confirming what I'm saying. So both of them offer this idea of, salvation afterwards and kind of not based on your status like Hinduism is and the caste system and things like that. Okay, so for example, both religions appeal to the poor people because they both offer salvation in the afterlife. Therefore, the spread was similar because it spread more rapidly among the poor. There we go. Okay, so that's how I do the short answer for these three. I hope that was helpful to kind of watch me think through it. I genuinely did not look at these. I glanced at them beforehand, but I think it's helpful sometimes for me to go through them without having looked at them at all. So you can hear how I think through. I could have spent time researching these and probably had much better answers for you. But kind of on the spot, these are the things that I came up with for those. Okay, so now we're going to move into period 3. Oh, I didn't talk about my colors. Sorry. So period 1 was brown. Remember, because this is period 1 is our, I think of it like dirt, like the very beginnings. Period 2 is red for religion. And now we're on period 3, which is blue because of all the kind of new oceanic travel that's happening in period 3, like the Indian Ocean trade, etc. So period 3 is called the post-classical age. Remember, we had period 1 was foundations. Period 2 is classical. Period 3 is post-classical. And this is 600 to 1450. So it's kind of the fall of all of those empires in 600, and then pretty much to Columbus is this time in between. And I really think period 3 is, to me, one of the harder ones to kind of summarize. So I feel like period 1 is first people. Period 2 is first civilizations, religions, etc. Period 3 is like in the middle. And then period 4 is like Europeans kind of taking over most of the world. So when I think about period 3, I kind of think about it of what happens when all those empires fall and how do they rebuild. And that's what I kind of feel like is the overall arch for me for period 3. Okay, so I'll go by chapter first. So the first chapter that you read in period 3 was chapter 7, which was the Byzantine Empire and Kievan Rus. So if you remember, the Byzantine Empire was after the Roman Empire fell. So when Rome fell, it split into half, and the western half goes back to feudalism. We'll talk about that in the other chapter. But the eastern half becomes the Byzantine Empire. And their capital is Constantinople. This is where we talked about Justinian and his wife Theodora and the kind of more progressive laws that they made. They were also Eastern Orthodox, which is a type of Christianity. So remember, this is that big, they call it like the Great Schism or the Great Split, where Western Europe stays Catholic and Eastern Europe becomes Eastern Orthodox. And kind of the main things we talked about for Eastern Orthodox, the biggest thing that always popped out in my mind is the iconoclasm, which means, or I can put it in parentheses here, this idea that you can't worship idols. Iconoclasm. I don't know if I'll be able to spell this right. Iconoclasm? Maybe. That could be spelled incorrectly. So again, they couldn't have idols. You couldn't have like pictures of Jesus or statues of Jesus in the church, because then you would be worshiping something that wasn't actually the person. But they did have beautiful artwork, like Bible pictures that had beautiful like drawings around it. Anyways, and then they also built the Hagia Sophia, which was that beautiful church there. So the Byzantine Empire, the reason that they're in the same chapter with Kievan Rus is that they were very, very similar. So Kievan Rus is in Russia. And I think it was something like the Byzantine Empire, maybe they had, I think like someone's sister or daughter or something married someone from the other empire. So that was one of the reasons why they had a good alliance, but also they traded with each other frequently. And so a lot of the ideas spread. So Kievan Rus is kind of the beginning of modern day Russia. And they started off as a bunch of different states that get united. The Byzantine Empire had sent missionaries there to convert them to Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and they did successfully. And the Eastern Orthodox Church is still huge in Russia today because of that. And those are kind of the basics that we talked about for those two. So again, Rome falls, and the eastern half becomes the Byzantine Empire. And then right above it, Kievan Rus up here was this collection of city-states that gets brought together into this place called Kievan Rus, and the Byzantine Empire is influencing a lot, sending missionaries, they convert to Christianity. And then as the Byzantine Empire falls, so does Kievan Rus, because it's so closely tied to the Byzantine Empire that they can't survive without all of their trading partners, etc. Okay. So chapter 8 was Islam. So Islam is the biggest new religion to form in period 3. Most religions form in period 2. Islam is really the only one in period 3. And this is something that's really helpful for me when I look at practice questions, because sometimes I'll see answer choices about Islam. And if the question is about period 1 and 2, I know that that can't be the answer, because Islam does not start until period 3. So the founder of Islam was Muhammad. He is their prophet. Remember, he was in the cave when he got the vision or the sight or the kind of prophecy about the religion. He first starts preaching to spread the religion, but remember when he dies, there's not a lot. I feel like it was only like 7. The basic foundations of Islam, you have the 5 pillars. Those consist of believing in one God, who is Allah, praying 5 times a day, giving money to the poor, fasting or not eating until nighttime during Ramadan, and then making that pilgrimage to Mecca, going to Mecca, which is their holy city. Remember, after Muhammad's death, the religion split into the Sunnis and Shiites over who was going to rule afterwards. And then the Islamic empires are ruled by people called caliphs. So when you see the word caliph, you should think like, okay, that's the leader of an Islamic empire. That's what that word means. Anyways, in these Islamic empires spread Islam. Some of them did more than others. So remember, they didn't force people to convert. So some people, Islamic empires would take over and not everyone would convert. But they did say if you're not Islam, you have to pay that tax, the jizya. And so some people were like, oh, okay, well, I'll convert so I don't have to pay this tax. So people converted for that reason as well. So Islam spreads all over Persia, where the Byzantine Empire used to be, into Constantinople, into North Africa, into Spain. It really covers quite a bit. Here we go. Oh, yeah, and the Umayyad dynasty is the one who expands it into Spain. After the Umayyad, we talked about 2 empires. Sorry, I should back up on that. We talked about 2 empires, the Umayyads and the Abbasids. So the Umayyads are first. They're the ones who expand Islam into Spain. And then the Abbasids, and both of these are Sunnis, the Abbasids move the capital to Baghdad and set this up as a really good spot for learning, built a lot of universities, translate a lot of texts into Arabic. And then you have a lot of Persians who were living in the area of Baghdad before, who start converting to Islam, and they contribute a lot of their learning and kind of make some different, kind of more like mystical forms of Islam. So we talked about Rumi, who was that poet. who would spin around in circles and would spout his beautiful poetry. Anyways, so that's that. And then finally, the Turks invade and take over. But the Islamic empires, the Umayyads and the Abbasids, they don't ultimately fall until the Mongols come in and they fall there. So kind of review, Islam as the religion starts. Started by Muhammad. It takes a long time to spread. At first, it's only a couple of people, but eventually it does spread. First, you have these different rulers called caliphs who try to spread, who grow the empire a little bit. They don't force people to convert. And then you have your first real kind of empire, the Umayyads, who expand all the way to Spain, and then the Abbasids, who really get this focus on education. Sorry, I went too far. Who really put this focus on education and just have more converts and people converting under the Abbasids. And then they eventually fall to the Mongols. Okay. The next chapter was on the African trade, or really the whole chapter on Africa. So we've got a lot of things going on in Africa during period 3. This is also the first time that we really talked about them because your book didn't bring up Africa too much in period 1 and 2, besides the first people being there. So you've got the Bantu people who are not in either of these maps, but if you look at these maps, you've got the Bantu kind of starting off here and going all the way down to the southern tip of Africa. Remember, as they go down, they spread technology like iron, the canoe, but they also spread disease. And they teach people how to farm, which is good and bad because it kind of ruins the environment. But a lot of people learn how to farm. So that's the Bantu migrations going here. And then you also had the Trans-Saharan trade, which was up here. And the Trans-Saharan trade gets taken over by Muslim merchants. So you've got the religion Islam spreading a lot in North Africa. They're also spreading camels, gold, salts, and enslaved people. And then over on the side here, you've got the Indian Ocean trade. So also taken over by Islamic merchants. The Indian Ocean is over here. And then a couple of places that we talked about. We talked about Ghana being a big empire during this time. If you remember the clip that I showed you in, oh no, that was Mali. So never mind, ignore that. Anyways, Ghana being one of the empires during this time. We also talked about Mali, which you can see here in the blue, a little bit bigger than Ghana. And Mali had the city Timbuktu. So if you remember the clip I showed you from Roots in class, they said that he wanted to go to Timbuktu. It's this big center of learning to go to university. And Mali is where Mansa Musa was from. And he's the one who traveled all the way across to Mecca and gave away all that gold that it kind of ruined the value of gold. And then we talked about the Songhai Empire as well here. I remember when I was in high school just having to memorize Ghana, Mali, Songhai as being kind of the 3 big empires in Africa. We also talked about Zimbabwe, which is over on this side. And Zimbabwe was the Christian empire. And remember, that made that bigger, not smaller. I was hoping to make that smaller. It did not. Oops, now that made that a lot bigger. Let me undo. Okay, we're just going to leave it that size. Anyways, so Zimbabwe built Great Zimbabwe, which was this big town. They had a wall around it, but then they eventually ruined the environment and left it. And then most societies are matrilineal, so they're following through the mother's lineage. Wealth of the time was based on slavery, which we know will kind of set up for the slave trade in the next time period. And, Swahili is created. So in these over here in the Swahili city-states that are practicing the Indian Ocean trade, they create the new language Swahili. And then religiously, you've got, again, a lot of Muslims. The Islam religion is really spreading in the north and over here. Or you have a lot of people who are polytheistic, or Christianity in Ethiopia, which means I messed that up. So let me pack up real quick. So Ethiopia is the Christian nation, and they're the ones who had those cool like stone buildings that were built like into the ground. And then I apologize, Zimbabwe was not the Christian nation, but Zimbabwe was the one who had the cool wall, which I don't think we talked about a whole lot in class, but it's a kind of a theme in history that a lot of nations will protect their cities with big walls until the Mongols. And so Zimbabwe is an example of that in Africa. Okay, so again, that's chapter 8 or chapter 9 on Africa. So chapter 10 was on East Asia. So remember, East Asia is China. You need to know that 100%. So we've got the Sui, Tang, and Song dynasty in East Asia in this time period. The Sui dynasty, kind of important things to know about them. They unite China. They build the Grand Canal. And remember, the Grand Canal is that waterway that unites South China and North China. And one of the big things that the Grand Canal brings is rice, the fast ripening rice, which gets invented in the Tang Dynasty. And that really helps boost the population, especially in North China, who didn't have as much rice up there. And then the Tang Dynasty, I always think of the tributary system because they both start with T. That's an easy one. Remember, the tributary system is where other people would give goods to the king, or I don't think it was mainly physically, but but to show them that they respected them. And then you also had the civil service exam during the Tang Dynasty. So remember, that was when you would take a test, and if you did good on it, you could get a better job, which could raise your status. It's cool because it allows for more equality. However, remember that the people who can actually take these tests are people who can read and write to begin with, which are usually the upper class. So it's actually not like super equalizing. You also had Buddhism starting Buddhism starts before, but Buddhism spreads to China, in the Tang Dynasty from India. You have the equal field system and the fast ripening rice. The equal field system was where the government was like, oh, we'll give land to poor people, but it wasn't necessarily as like we love poor people and want equality. It was like the emperor was worried about the rich people taking away their power. So they were like, let's take away all of your land. And so they took away the land from the rich people and like divvied it out to the rest of the people. But it did help. A lot of people got more land through it. All right, and then the Song Dynasty, they're the ones who kind of set the stage for the beginning of industrialization. So they don't fully industrialize like you're thinking from like 8th grade industrialization. Not that. Proto kind of means like before. So they're starting more industry, etc., which will allow them to industrialize later. They're the ones who start making guns, and they also have foot binding. So things get worse for women in the Song Dynasty. Trade-wise, East Asia is using the Silk Road. They're also developing the flying cash, remember that like banking system, the compass, and the junk ship. And then they would trade down here as well, but mainly Silk Road. Religiously in China, you've got Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. In period 3, we see some new combinations. So Buddhism and Taoism combine to create Zen Buddhism, and Buddhism and Confucianism combine to create Neo-Confucianism. Then remember at the end of this chapter, we had those little sections on Korea and Japan and Vietnam. So remember, Japan is the one who's scared of China, and they're like, we're going to be just like China, and they try, but it fails, and so then they go to feudalism. And that has the samurai, and it's really similar to kind of European feudalism. So again, remember, Japan is scared of China. It's like, let's be like China, let's centralize, this will be great, and then it fails. And then they decentralize and start feudalism. Korea is all about being like China, and they have a lot of sinification with China, and that's like assimilation. So assimilating to things that are, like Chinese, they're practicing the tribute system with them, just kind of falling in with China. And then Vietnam does not like China. Vietnam does not welcome Chinese culture, and Vietnam has nuclear families, which is quite a bit different than China. So China, you living with your extended family, like you think of Mulan, right? You've got like the grandparents in the house as well. Whereas in Vietnam, it's just like mom, dad, kids, just smaller families there. So quite a bit of differences between Vietnam and China, which makes sense because they're not trying to be like them. So again, that was chapter 10, China, Sui, Tang, and Song. Okay. All right, and then chapter 11 was on South Asia and Southeast Asia. So remember, South Asia is India, and then Southeast Asia are kind of all these places over here, mainly islands. So at the end of period 2, the Gupta Empire had fallen. Sorry, drinking some water. The Gupta Empire had fallen, and in period 3, no one can totally unite India after that. Period 2 is really, the Gupta Empire is like the golden age for India, and in period 3, no one unites them. Muslims invade northern India, and one of them destroys Buddhist and Hindu shrines, and that was not a successful way to convert people. So a lot of people were very resistant to Islam at first because of all these destruction of Hindu and Buddhist shrines. But eventually Islam does spread into India, and quite a few people are still Muslim today there. You also have in India the Indian Ocean trade. That's kind of really the big part of period 3 for India. So the Indian Ocean trade had been there in period 2, but now it gets revitalized, remember, by Muslim merchants. So Muslim merchants take over. A lot of them start settling on the coast here and marrying Indian women and converting them to Islam. Things that they were trading were a lot of fabrics. Over here in the islands, they're trading a lot of spices. They're also trading enslaved people, ivory from elephants, and then they're getting things like gold from Africa, dates from Africa, which are like a food, and different silks and things like that. Again, we said Islam spread, got that. A lot of Buddhists start converting to Islam because Buddhism starts becoming more corrupt, which is like hard to imagine. I don't think of Buddhism as being a super corrupt religion, but Buddhist monks and things were becoming more corrupt, and so people start converting to Islam. And then, but however, through all of this, the caste system is still really strong, and Hinduism is still really strong throughout this time period. And then finally, Angkor Wat is built in Cambodia. So Cambodia is over here, and there's a picture of Angkor Wat, which is just a really beautiful example of kind of like Buddhist influences and also just beautiful monumental architecture there. And that's one of the places that you should know. Okay. All right. Why am I? Oh, yes. And then I think this is the last chapter. Chapter 12 was Western Europe after Rome. So we kind of started off all of period 3 with what happens to Eastern Europe with the Byzantine Empire. And then it comes back at the end with chapter 12, which was what happens to Western Europe afterwards. So at the end, Western Europe falls and they become a feudal society. Remember we talked about feudalism, you're living on those manors and you only have a couple of people, like 100 people or so living there. You've got peasants here at the bottom, then you've got knights who protect the land. Nobles are the wealthy people. And then I don't know why it's not here, but you'd have the church for sure right here. And then the king, who no one really ever sees on these manors. Remember, the church had split, and Byzantine Empire was Eastern Orthodox, and Western Europe stays Catholic. And then towards the end of period 3, the Crusades start. Remember, we talked about the Crusades were these, quote, holy wars, unquote, where in Jerusalem, it had gotten taken over, and the people who had taken it over had said that Christians and Jews can't go and visit anymore. And so the Byzantine Empire, who's very close to Jerusalem, started getting worried that they were going to get taken over. And so they're like, hey, Western Europe, could you guys help us go over there and like get Jerusalem back? Isn't this like crap that we can't go and visit there? In Western Europe, you have a lot of boys because of those laws who couldn't inherit land, the primogeniture laws, only the older brothers could. And they're like, oh yeah, this would be a good excuse to get some free land and go. And I'm sure some of them went for religious reasons as well. And so they go on the Crusades. At first, they do take back the Holy City, but then they lose it. And then they go on multiple other Crusades, and they never get it back after that. But it does kind of bring Western Europe out of feudalism because they start seeing other places. They start trading with other places again and really start opening up. And people are leaving these little farms. And so at the very, very end of period 3, Western Europe starts the Renaissance. And remember, that's that rebirth of kind of Greek and Roman ideas, a lot of emphasis on artwork, etc. And it kind of pulls them out of feudalism. Okay. Oh, I lied. There was the Mongols chapter. And the Americas. Okay, this was a longer unit than I thought. All right, so chapter 13. How could I forget the Mongols? That's probably the best one. So chapter 13, the Mongols. So the Mongols, we know, start in Mongolia. They're a nomadic tribe, nomadic pastoralists who are going from place to place with their horses. Their leader's name is Genghis Khan. There's a picture of him. Remember, after Genghis Khan died, his grandsons kind of split up the empire. So you had his grandson Batu, who takes over Russia. Ugalu, who takes over the Middle East, the Abbasid Empire, and Kublai Khan, who takes over China. The Mongols eventually lose power because these grandsons just aren't as good as Genghis Khan. But kind of cool things overall. The Mongols revitalized the Silk Road. They made it really, really safe. People started trading on it again. They made an international law. They did kind of help spread the Black Plague through the Silk Road. Women were more independent. They created pants, and they had the siege warfare, where they would go over walled buildings. And they were super good horse riders. Remember that they could like sleep on their horses and do lots of cool things on horses. I feel like we know the Mongols pretty well. All right, and then the last one, sorry, I keep slipping around. Chapter 14 was the Americas. on the eve of globalization. So what that means is this is the Americas before Europeans get there. So we had talked about in period 2, we had the Mayans was kind of the big civilization that we talked about. But we also talked about Teotihuacan, the city in Mexico City. In period 1, we talked about the Olmecs with their big head and the Moqui, which I think were in the Andes. So in period 3, we've got the Mississippians. And remember, the Mississippians are in North America, around the obvious Mississippi River today. And they built those big mounds out of dirt that looked like big mounds. The Toltec, they were the ones who kind of took over the Mayan territory, so kind of moved into those cities that they had abandoned, were very similar to the Mayans and had a tribute system. And then our kind of big ones that are new are the Aztecs and the Incas. So the Aztecs were originally hunter-gatherers who moved near Mexico City after the Toltecs. They built the chinampas, those floating gardens. They also had a tribute system, and they had a theocracy. Remember, theocracy is that very religious ruling. And then finally, the Incas, who were in South America, right here. And they were split into different provinces. So similar to the Persians also used the word provinces. Remember, Greece had polis as their city-states. They had the Mita system, where the young boys would have to work once they got to a certain age on public things like building those really cool roads. And it's the last one there, so that's cool roads. Okay, so those are my chapters. So before I go over the key concepts, let's just look at those chapters real quick again, because there were a lot more than I remembered that there was. So we started out with chapter 7, Byzantine Empire and Kievan Rus. Byzantine Empire is Eastern Europe, okay, because Rome had been there in period 2. It fell. Eastern Europe becomes the Byzantine Empire. That's Justinian, Constantinople, Eastern Orthodox. And then above them in Russia is Kievan Rus. And this is the beginning stages of Russia. And they are very similar to the Byzantine Empire. Same religion, etc. And when the Byzantine Empire falls, so does Kievan Rus. Chapter 8, we had Islam. Islam starts, huge new religion in period 3. Monotheistic, Muhammad's its founder. After Muhammad's death, it splits into 2, the Sunnis and the Shiites, who still, today, we see a lot of issues between the 2. The 2 big empires for the Islamic world are the Umayyads and the Abbasids. They take over what was the Persian Empire from period 2. So if you want to think about it in terms of like what fell in period 2 and kind of grew in period 3, the Persian Empire falls, and then the Islamic empires grow there. But then they spread even further. They spread into Northern Africa. They spread up into Spain, most of the Middle East. They eventually fall at the end of period 3 when the Mongols come in. Chapter 9 was all about Africa. So again, we didn't talk too much about Africa in period 2. In period 1, we talked about there being the first people there. But we've got in period 3, the Bantu moving down Africa. We've got a lot of trade routes. We've got trans-Saharan trade, Indian Ocean trade. We've got some big empires like Ghana, Mali, Songhai. You've got Zimbabwe, which is the big city with the walls around it. And you've got Ethiopia, which is a Christian area. It's over here somewhere. Most societies are matrilineal. They do have slavery, and you're seeing Swahili, which is that language, which is Arabic, and Bantu, which is forming over here. East Asia for China. So in period 2, you had the Han Dynasty, which fell at the end. And then you have a warring time where a lot of people are fighting in China. And then you have the Sui Dynasty, which unites China again, builds a Grand Canal. Tang Dynasty, tributary system, and then the Song Dynasty. The main thing I think of is foot binding there. Excuse me, drinking some water. In period 3 for China, lots of trade on the Silk Road. It's getting revitalized again. They're creating new syncretic religions like Zen Buddhism and Neo-Confucianism. And then in Japan, don't like China, go with feudalism. Well, they try to be like China, doesn't work, go with feudalism. Korea, love China. And then Vietnam doesn't like China at all. Chapter 11, again, was India. No one can unite them after the Gupta falls in period 2. But the Indian Ocean trade is huge. Islam spreads. Chapter 12, Western Europe. So again, Rome fell. Western Europe goes into feudalism. But then they have the Crusades and the Renaissance and kind of move out of it. Chapter 13, the Mongols, new. Out of nomadic pastoralists, take over almost everything. Largest land empire ever. They don't go over the ocean, though, so they're not the largest overseas empire, just over land. Anyways, Genghis Khan, and then his grandson split it up, and then the grandsons eventually caused the downfall. And then chapter 14, the Americas. So these build off of ones before, like the Mayans, the Moqui, etc. And then you've got new ones like the Mississippians, the Aztecs, the Incas, and the Toltec. Okay, so there are 3 key concepts for period 3. Again, like period 2, these ones don't line up super well with the chapters, which is why I'm just doing them afterwards. So you've got 3.1, which is communication and exchange networks. So again, this is all about trade, all those trade networks. 3.2, state forms and interactions. This is all about your new empires. How are they interacting with each other? And then 3.3, increased productive capacity and its consequences. So in period 3, we just see a lot more advances in being able to produce things. I think of like gunpowder, guns, fast ripening rice, bananas, canoes, etc. All these new things, and kind of what's the consequences of those new things. Okay. So starting with 3.1, the improved transportation technology means you have more trade. So all these existing trade routes just flourish again in period 3. Silk Road, Mediterranean, Indian Ocean, Trans-Saharan. Oops, excuse me. More about the trade. They're dependent on new technologies like the compass, the astrolabe, bigger ships, new forms of money, credits. You also have coins, paper money, and the Hanseatic League are like these leagues that form to kind of protect each other as traders. I think I'm going to see. Okay, here we go. Nope, that went backwards. There we go. And then the expansion of empires facilitates this trade. So like China with the Sui Tang and Song dynasty expand trade. The Byzantine Empire expands trade there. The Muslims, we know, they take over the Indian Ocean trade and the Trans-Saharan trade and expand trade. And the Mongols also help with the Silk Road and trade. Okay. Second thing here about trade is migration. So people are migrating as they're trading. And this has different effects on language and the environment. So it causes a lot of deforestation. I think of like the Bantu who teach people how to farm and then ruin the environment. It also spreads new animals like the Polynesians. Remember Moana, and they're spreading new animals as they move from place to place. And new languages like Bantu and Swahili in Africa. Okay. You also have religions that spread. So Islam spreads, and other kind of cultural things that come with it spread. You've got your writers in this time period. So Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo. We also talked about a couple other. I think Zhang something from China we talked about. And there's one other that's escaping me right now. But anyways, these people who are traveling start writing books about their travels, and that also spreads a lot of new information through these trade networks. Okay. You also have more cultural diffusion. Again, we talked about religion. Alphabets like Greek and Indian. Spread of printing, gunpowder, new foods, new diseases also spread. I'm going the wrong way. I apologize. No, now it's giving me the spinny wheel of death. There we go. All right. And then going on to 3.2. So that was all 3.1 about trade. 3.2 is all about those new empires. So empires collapsed in period 2 and new states emerged. The Byzantine Empire, Sui Tang and Song. I don't know, those should be a different, because those ones are in China, not the Byzantine Empire is in Europe. The Mongols, you have feudalism in Europe and Japan. You have the Abbasid Umayyads in the Islamic empires. You have China influencing its surrounding areas like Japan and Korea. And then a lot of technology and culture transfers as well through the Crusades, through the Mongol. Look how big the Mongols were compared to the Roman Empire. That's crazy. Okay. You have increased productivity. This is the last one, 3.3. So as agriculture continues to improve, you've got better terracing. That was when they would build into the sides of the mountains like this. You had the Chinampas in the Americas where they were growing on the swamps. You've got more production of textiles and porcelain, iron and steel. So all these kind of new things that are being produced. But then some of this helps and some of this hurts. So you have some cities in period 3 that do really well, and you have some that do not do well. So the cities that kind of fall during this time period is mainly because of disease and invasion. So think of like all those cities that the Mongols invade and they fall. If you think of in Eastern Europe with feudalism, there's no really cities doing well in that time period. But then you also have cities that are doing better because they've got better transportation, better commerce. I think of like in China, because of the Grand Canal, you get more food to places, and that helps as well. So it's kind of all summarized as periods of decline and increased urbanization. So like some urban areas grow, some fall. The temperatures also finally warm up again. Remember, we had the little ice age before this, and now they're getting warmer. Okay. There we go. Other things in 3.3, you have new labor organizations with all this new production of things. You have guilds, which again, like we talked about last time, are kind of like those unions where people protect themselves, fight for better rights. And you've got new forms of labor. So coerced labor means forced. So you should know that word if you don't already, forced labor. So you've got serfdom. So remember in Europe, we talked about the serfs, and in Japan with feudalism, the serfs. And the Midas system in the Incas, where the boys would have to work. And most of the societies in period 3 are patriarchal. Women did start to have a little bit more power in the Mongolian Empire, in Western Europe, Japan, and Southeast Asia, but everywhere else, it's not looking better. And diffusion of new religions changes gender roles as well. So like Buddhism and Christianity and Islam, as they spread, those religions come with particular roles for women, and that changes those roles as well. Okay. All right, so I just wanted to show you guys this. I used these PowerPoints at the end of last year to review for the AP test. And at the end, we did some map quizzes. We'll do these too at the end of the year. But these are just some important places that you should know from period 3. So you should know where the Swahili city-states are, which you remember on the side of Africa. Sui, Tang, and Song, you should know those are in China. The Byzantine Empire, you should know that's Eastern Europe. The Islamic Caliphates, you should know Islam starts in the Middle East and spreads. The Mongols, you should know kind of start in Mongolia, and then you should know just how huge and big their empire is. Polynesian Islands, you should know where those are. The Incan Empire, you should know it's in South America. And you should know where Japan is as well. So there are just some places that people have kind of struggled with in the past that I did a map quiz on last year. And I just felt like keeping it in here just so you could see in case you wanted to kind of practice up on your geography in these remaining days. Okay, so you're going to look at some multiple choice questions for the end here. There was not any short answers on the practice test, so we'll just do some multiple choice. But just like last time, I'm going to time you and have you kind of look at them to start with, and then I'll go over the answers afterwards. So let's take a minute for this first question. And again, these are all right from the AP practice test, so it should be similar to what you see on the actual test. So your 1 minute starts now. All right, there's my timer. Okay, so looking at this one, we've got these two tables at the top. So again, super important first that you look at these titles to know what these tables are about. So we've got table 1 over here, the origin of the coins and a buried cache from circa 750 CE found near Exxon, central China. So I don't know what cache means, but coins, my guess is maybe like a chest or something that they found. And it's 750 CE, so I know that this is the beginning kind of ish of period 3, and that these are from China. Excuse me. And so if I look at the map here of these coins, I see they've got Chinese coins from before the Tang. And I'm thinking in my head, okay, period 3 is Sui Tang Song. So they've got some coins from before the Tang. They've got coins from the early Tang. They've got coins from Persia, the Byzantine Empire, wherever this is, and Japan. So it looks like they've got a lot of different coins. The majority of them, though, are Chinese coins, right? I'm only seeing a couple of coins from other places, but does show me that they're trading with other places. Then here we've got origins of the coins in a Viking buried cache from 900 CE found in northwestern England. So here's again some more coins that they found. This is a little bit after, so we've got 750 to 900, and these are in England now instead of China. So we've got number of coins, Viking kingdoms in northern England, 5,000. That makes sense that that'd be the most since these are from a Viking place. Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in southern England, 1,000. The Frankish Empire, I know that's also in Europe, 1,000. Vikings in Scandinavia, also Europe, 50. The Abbasids, though, I know this is the Middle East, 50 coins. Papacy in northern Italian states, 20 coins, and the Byzantine Empire, 1. So a lot of these are from Europe, but there are some from the Middle East, etc. there as well. Okay, so which of the following conclusions is best supported by the data in Table 1? The Tang Empire's legitimacy continue to be challenged in many parts of China. That I don't know how I would get that out of this at all. This is just about the money, and to me, I would think both of these have to do with trade. So I would cross off A. Okay. The great majority of economic transactions in Tang China continue to be carried out through barter. So you've got to know what the word barter here means. So barter means to just trade things for things, not to use money. So like, I am going to trade you a stick of butter for a bag of flour, okay, and not use any money. So that to me wouldn't be true because if I look at China, like they've got a ton of coins. And so clearly they're using coins and they're not just bartering. So I would cross B out. C, long distance trade results in the establishment of new cities and diasporic merchant communities. Maybe, because I do see some cities here listed. And then D, long distance trade routes were active during the early Tang period, even as most trade in China remained local. So that one also makes sense to me because we've got the early Tang dynasty. I see that they are doing long distance trade because I see these other places, but they're not really doing that much, right? Most of the coins are coming from the early Tang dynasty. So since this says which of the following conclusions is best supported by the data in Table 1, it would make the correct answer D and not C. Just because, well, C, I think you can kind of see that on here. D is much better supported by this table than C is because it's showing you that most of the coins are here from the Tang and not from the other places. Okay, let's go to the second question in this set. Okay, same thing. I will time you for 1 minute. It's the same chart, but a different question. Your 1 minute starts now. All right, there's our 1 minute for that question. So again, I already know what these charts show because we just talked about them. So we've got the question, a historian researching the economic history of Eurasia in the period 600 to 1450, period 3, would most likely find the two tables useful as a source of information about which of the following. So I'm remembering this is kind of similar to a question we had on the last video with this, like, how would a historian use this information? So this might be something to kind of think about a lot when you look at sources, since it seems to be a common question that's popping up, is how would a historian use this source? How would it be most useful? Okay, so we've got A, the diffusion of cultural traditions along Eurasian trade routes. I know that's true, but none of these talk about culture. This is just showing me the coins, so I would cross off A. B, the spread of technological innovations across regions in Eurasia. Again, I know technology did travel across, but neither of these to me show me anything about new technologies. It's just showing me about the coins. So I'd cross off B. C, the geographic extent of the monetization of Eurasian economies. So This one is worded a little bit hard. So to break this down, the geographic extent, I think geography. Okay, so like the geographic extent probably being like a large geography of the monetization. So monetization, the word I can pull out of there is money. So the extent that the like economy is using money is using coins of Eurasian economies. Remember, Eurasia's Europe, Africa, Asia. Anyways, so if I look at these, it's showing me that, or excuse me, just Europe and Asia. It is showing me that both Europe and Europe, are using money, monetization. They have changed their economies into using money. So I would keep C. D, the extent to which government economic policies in Eurasia in the period 600 to 1450 represent a continuity of earlier policies. So remember, continuity means things that stay the same. So if I look here, it looks like in China, they still have 19 of the coins. Like some of the things are staying the same. But it's not a whole lot, right? You've got 451 from that time period. So I wouldn't say, if I have this down to C and D, I would see C as the better answer, because I can tell that in Europe and Asia, they've both started using money, whereas like using similar economic policies is only a little bit, so I wouldn't count D. So the correct answer for that one is C. All right, your last one with these charts. Let's take 1 minute to go over this question. Your 1 minute starts now. All right, and there's a timer for that one. Okay, so we've got the data presented in the two tables best support which of the following comparative statements about Tang China and Viking England. So it's just asking me to compare how are these similar. Elites, which means the wealthy people, in Tang China were less wealthy than elites in Viking England. So if I look at Tang China, it's hard to really tell based off of this how wealthy their elites were. I think that this is kind of like a trick answer, because if I look at this, Tang Dynasty has 451 coins and the Viking ones have 5,000. So you might think that they were more wealthy, but then I think, like, what were these coins, right? Like maybe in Tang China, these were all coins that were worth like 100, and maybe in Vikings they were only worth 1, and so therefore you'd have more, and so you don't know like how much each of these coins is worth. So I would take off A. B, merchants stood at the top of the social hierarchies in both Tang China and Viking England. So this is a good answer choice, because you've got to remember that in China they did not like merchants, which we talked about briefly in class. But remember, they thought that merchants like didn't create anything new, and so therefore they weren't valued as much. So you could cross out B just because it's factually incorrect. C, Tang coins were typically of greater value than coins in Viking England. Again, that's something I would probably assume, since they didn't have as many coins, that they were probably of greater value per coin. And then the last one, coinage was seen as a useful means of storing value in both Tang China and Viking England. And that's the one that I would kind of narrow it down to. So I would think of this question as either being about C or about D. And I guess the answer I have to think of here is which one of these is like the more for sure answer. Like, do I really know in C that Tang Dynasty's ones are worth more? And I don't know that for sure, right? I assume that they probably are, but I really don't know that. Whereas D, I can say for sure based on this, that coinage was seen as a useful means of storing value, because they both have them and they were both keeping them in whatever a cache is. I don't know if this is, some type of storage box or something. But anyways, so narrow it down to C and D, and then your correct answer there is D, just because you can tell this more for sure based off of these graphs than you can for C. Okay. So that kind of summarizes some practice questions for period 3. Again, they didn't have a short answer question on the practice test for this time period, so I don't have one on here. But I will for the next one for period 4. So just to review again, I'm wondering what's the easiest way. Here we go. Just to review again, we had our period 1 key concepts, big geography, Neolithic Revolution, early societies. We had our period 2, the beginning of a lot of religions, the beginning of the first empires, the beginning of the first trade systems. And now we have for period 3, kind of the expansion of those trade networks, new empires, 3.2, and then 3.3, like increased productivity. You're growing a lot more, creating a lot more. And how does that have consequences? So you see it kind of ruins the environment in some places, might cause more war in some places, causes urban areas to grow, causes some of them to fall, etc. So those are our key concepts for all of those. And again, I think it's super helpful before you sit down to study to always review what you've learned before. And then, this should say period 2 right here. And then after you're done, also to kind of review those. Sometimes it's helpful to take a couple of minutes. There's my timer for you guys. Take a couple minutes, like take 10 minutes to do something else, and then come back and kind of review it again too is helpful. Okay. I hope on what day that was. Let me let you know. We'll have the last review session on Monday from noon to 1, and that will go over period 4, which we're only halfway through right now, but it'll be nice to kind of review that before you get back. Hope you have a good weekend. Goodbye.